Ladies, gentlemen, and children of Hades, today I want to just take a few minutes and talk about an upcoming game that I am personally extremely excited for, Hades 2. This is the sequel to one of my personal favorite games, something that I sunk a few hundred hours into starting even back when it was in early access. It wasn't something that I'd made videos for on this channel, just something that I was incredibly personally passionate about playing. That said, now Hades 2 is underway properly, entering its own early access, ideally in the next couple of months, and we recently had a pretty extensive bit of footage released from the developers of a few early game runs in Hades 2, which told us an extensive amount of new information about the game. So essentially, I just want to check out that footage, talk about what makes Hades special within the sort of genre it fits into for anyone who didn't really play the first game that much, but then mostly we'll just talk about the changes and new things that we can see coming in Hades 2, just so I can sort of gush and get my excitement out a bit. I do want to be clear though, the game isn't necessarily going to appeal to every person on the planet. It is something though that I really love myself, so I really want to talk about it. First up then, the game is an action-style roguelike floor-by-floor dungeon crawler type game with fast-paced, nearly hack-and-slash gameplay. I say nearly because there are timed dodges, things like deflecting projectiles that you can unlock through different boons. There's a lot more thought going into each button press than I would normally associate with the term hack-and-slash, but you essentially just wade through increasingly larger numbers of enemies in each room, up on each floor, for a reward at the end of it that will boost your power. Some of the chambers are events or shops or things like that, and every few chambers you get a boss, which if you beat it lets you continue up to the next underworld region on your way towards the surface. There were 4 bosses in the first game, excluding the secret hidden ones, with various variations of their movesets as well through the heat system, and if you beat them all it was a completed run, and you restart from the beginning. If you died at any point, you restart from the beginning. That said, the setting itself of the game, with the main characters being Greek gods or at least mythical figures, this death is considered a part of the continuity in a way. It's not really a respawn so much as a refresh. You are brought from one place to another. It's a break and then you go again. The story progresses, win or lose, you move forward, and the story is written extremely well, with fantastic visuals and sound design to go along with it, and the story is built to react to your progress and to how you actually handle yourself in different runs, which is actually a really cool way to do a story in a game like this. The combat itself has an extreme amount of variation as well, with 6 different base weapon types and 4 different versions of each of those weapon types past that, and that's before even considering the ridiculous amount of combinations of boons you can get from the different gods that you can go for and have different powers or Daedalus hammer upgrades as well. There's just an insane amount of different playstyles available within the game, each with their own unique charm to it, and it just makes the moment-to-moment gameplay feel fresh every time. The best way to explain my love of the playstyles personally is sort of Monster Hunter. In Monster Hunter, I am someone who loves playing every single weapon in the series. I don't really just stick to a main too long. Sometimes I will get stuck on something for a month or two and play it out the wazoo, but I always really like variety, and that transfers over to Hades extremely well. In a lot of ways, the quality of the weapons individually in Hades reminds me of the movesets of Monster Hunter weapons, all extremely satisfying and unique in their own ways, all relatively balanced around the way that the game works as a whole, if not perfectly by any means, and that makes me just want to play every single one of them, which Hades itself actually rewards you for doing too, or at least the first one did. I could go on for like an hour just talking about the first game easily, but that's not what most of this is for. That's not why I wanted to do this. I just wanted to give a quick recap for people who haven't played the first game at all and give some context on my feelings and history of it. So now let's move on to the present and the future with Hades 2. First things first, the biggest major change is we have a new main character, Melinoe, who is the sister of the first game's protagonist, Zagreus, also a daughter of Hades. Unlike the first, your end boss of the run isn't going to be Hades himself stopping you from reaching the surface. Instead, your end boss is Chronos, the Titan, god of time itself. And while this game will be built in a way where you are going to be rewarded for knowledge of Greek mythology and for knowledge of the first game's story, where you get little hints, little Easter eggs that'll make you chuckle, things like that, it'll all sort of tie together. It's also built in a way where if you're going into it completely blind to both of those things, you're still going to have a great time. That said, the actual end boss for your runs within this game is going to be Chronos, looking for vengeance for yourself for something that was done to your family by him not long after you were born. And this will be explored more in the story itself, which I want to avoid spoiling here for anyone who doesn't want to actually see that stuff ahead of time. For obvious reasons though, that is an extremely fitting proper antagonist for a game where revival and cycles are a major part of the gameplay loop itself. time. So I'm quite interested to see where the story itself will go from there. But already you can sort of feel that we are in a similar domain, familiar concepts, familiar style, and a familiar angle. We obviously don't know too much about the story itself yet, but I do quite like the way it seems to be aiming. As for the rest of it, the combat, the gameplay, the visuals, the best look at it that we have so far is from this relatively recent technical test that you've been seeing in the background. The first big representation of the difference of our new protagonist is that there is now a sprint function in the game, and now instead of the cast crystals, you have an actual full-on mana bar that regenerates once per chamber, or with effects from different boons, because Malinois is meant to be a much more magic-leaning character, and thus playstyle in general, compared to Zagreus being a lot more in your face, and mostly sort of tanky and melee focused in the first game. As a result, the magic system itself seems particularly fleshed out, with one neat new mechanic being Omega moves, which lets you channel any attack to infuse magic into it, which actually spends your mana bar. As a better example of what this is more specifically, the 4 buttons that you have access to really for inputs are a light attack combo, special attack, cast, or press to dash, hold to sprint. You can do an Omega version of attack for a stronger attack, an Omega version of your special for a stronger special, an Omega version of your cast for a stronger cast. On which note, Malinois's cast, by default, is a circular effect on the floor that grasps and holds enemies in place, which is really cool, and the Omega version of this also applies a load of damage when it expires. As well, while I think the magic and mana bar system is a more involved sort of replacement to the cast crystals, it's worth noting the non-Omega cast seems to actually be free. It doesn't have a resource cost, and the limiting factor is that you can only cast it when it's not already on the ground, which gives this ability a significantly different set of rules for the developers to mess around with boons and things like that, than the cast from the first game, which is pretty neat in my opinion. As well, of course, there is more standard spellcasting in its own sort of function. Another part of this character is that she is also a witch, meaning that she can use magical ingredients to great effect, so occasionally chambers you progress through will have interactables that you can pick up and perhaps actually use later on to advance your magic. But also, it'll lose to a power that you can unlock within your first few runs, which are hexes, exclusive to Selene. Another new characters for Hades 2, hexes are a really cool mechanic, sort of similar to the call system in the first game, where the idea is you pick your hex, it has a cost associated with it, and you pay that cost by spending mana on Omega moves. This resets between chambers as well. After you've spent the required amount though, the hex is charged and you can use the effect that you have chosen, with the best example we got during this playtest being a beam that did massive damage while active, and this creates an even further interesting playstyle element, as there are various ways through boons to give yourself mana regen, and so you could fully play around the various different hexes and your Omega moves if you want to, which is really neat as far as the fact that there's just a billion different combinations of those things as well, and that's just one way to build in a run. As well, the first weapon in the game, the base weapon, is the Witch's Staff, where the moveset is essentially magical all the way to its core, long-range attacks, long-range specials, an Omega attack that fires out a line of damage both ways, an Omega special that fires an extra powerful magical orb of damage. Then the other weapon shown in the technical test was the Sister Blades, a sickle and dagger combo for a much more assassin-y style of gameplay. There were also clear marker spots in the hub for 4 more weapons, so theoretically there will be 6 different ones total, like in the first game, and there were hints at a bit more being involved with this system, likely similar to the weapon aspects in the first game as well. So far though, a more ranged and more melee playstyle are what we've seen in this technical test, but from what we saw, even the Sister Blades playstyle was a very sort of high damage, high risk hit and run style of gameplay, so Malinois is genuinely meant to feel quite different to Zagreus, and in that way, Hades 2 isn't going to be a replacement for the first game. It doesn't overwrite its existence, it doesn't make it null, it is a fully separate entity even on the gameplay side of things, because the entire playstyle of the game and the basis of each weapon will feel different due to these things. As well, the vast majority of the gods and characters of the first game will of course be returning to offer their own boons, but even the returning gods, because of the gameplay itself being different, have completely different boons. The boons have totally different effects than they did for our first game because of our new protagonist, which makes them totally fresh in this experience. On top of that, there is a number of new gods and deities and such offering their boons this time. As well, in the first game, the fight was a bit of a smaller scale one, just Zagreus wanting to meet his mother, escaping down below in hell up to the surface. In this game, your antagonist is Chronos, who has quite a few more enemies willing to help you along your way to defeat him, including ones like Apollo, the god of light, as well as Hestia, the god of fire, Selene, who I mentioned earlier with the hexes, Hephaestus, the god of the forge, and even Arachne, the first spider, who's in charge of a full-on new mechanic called armor. When you encounter her, you pick one of 3 options. This essentially gives you a barrier on your health that does not replenish at any point in any way, and as long as you have that armor on, you get the effect of the boon. Once you take enough damage that the armor breaks, the bonus will also wear off. Also, it seems to change your actual outfit in small, detailed ways, which is quite lovely. Past that, it's worth noting that there is only one region currently playable in the game, so comparatively, this is like only being able to complete Tartarus in the first game and then being reset. So we do have a bit of a limited scope of everything, but the first area is Erebus, and with this being a new area to the series, it is absolutely chock full of new enemy types as well the whole way through it, so really this is just a complete redesign. And of course the boss at the end of it is there, and it is Hecate, who we will be talking about a bit more in a moment. The same base formula for the game that made the first game so enjoyable is here, but with a complete rework of combat at its core. Different weapons, different moveset, different enemies, and different bosses, so for anyone who actually enjoyed the first game at all, this should be a meaningful departure that still scratches the exact same itch. And for anyone who didn't play the first game, it still promises a lot of similarities to a game that I and many other people will swear is worth at least trying once for anyone out there who likes to play video games just as a whole. And I remain extremely hopeful for Hades 2. It's worth mentioning at this point, you can also sign up to try and get into the technical test for the game if you are on Steam on PC, which, if you are let in, will give you early access to the same section of the game that we see in this stream, first region, and some of the hub area. On which note, there is of course a fully new hub area, the Crossroads, and where you first spawn in, there is a frog that you can give chin scratches to, and I already am in love with this game. This hub is full of new character inclusions such as Hecate, who saved you and raised you, Nemesis, Odysseus, and even a returning face in Hypnos, who seems to be permanently asleep, at least so far. Past that, we have the Altar of Ashes. This seems to be a sort of replacement to the Mirror of Darkness from the first game, and it functions in a pretty different yet similar way. You get ashes as you progress through the game and play normally, and then you can spend your ashes here to get bonus effects for your characters that are seemingly a bit larger in scope in the form of cards. And also the progression moves in a whole different way, with it being paths through relation cards that you can unlock, but once they are all unlocked, you can have any of these equipped at a time up to your grasp maximum, which is the gauge in the top right. You can also spend a resource as you play to increase your maximum grasp over time, with the idea being that there is technically just a really deep, long endgame, even just in the sense that grasp is infinitely increasable, which means if you play the game enough, you will be able to have every one of these cards equipped at the same time. And while there are only 9 of them in the technical test, there are a lot more in early access, and likely even more for the full game past that too. For examples of what these cards can do then, there's a card that makes time slow down while you are channeling Omega moves. There's one that restores health between chambers, with higher amounts restored if you are at lower life numbers. There's a card that increases damage to enemies stood in the area of your cast. There's one that increases sprint speed by 20%, one that increases maximum life and maximum mana by 20. There's a classic Death Defiance card, which gives you a second life if you die in various occasions, and there's a few more things like this here too. Another interesting part of the system, though, that they show is the final card, which has 0 grasp cost, but only activates if you have cards equipped that are 1 cost, 2 cost, 3 cost, 4 cost, and 5 cost. So you can only even have this if you have a minimum of 15 maximum grasp and laid out in that way. But just to show some of the larger depth of the system in general, this is actually a pretty crazy thing to have in here. Honestly, there's a hell of a lot going on here with this game. Mostly, I just wanted to go over the larger concepts at play, go over the original game a little bit for those who missed it, just about why I think it was as good as I do, because I think it's an absolute masterpiece, and just have a look at what was essentially nearly 3 hours of gameplay we were given for Hades 2 to talk about and what we could learn from the game here and there. Hopefully you've enjoyed this sort of breakdown then. Let me know your own thoughts down in the comments below, of course, and let me know if you want any sort of further coverage for Hades 2 down the line, because I'm going to be playing it either way. I guarantee you that much. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.